Hello everybody, it's Kirsty. You know me, I solve crimes, try to solve crimes, do my very best using astrology or forensic astrology. Today we're going to go way back 64 years ago to Chicago's longest and oldest mystery of who killed the sisters Barbara and Patricia Grimes. Barbara and Patricia left home at 7:30 from McKinley Park in Chicago. They left 3634 South Damon Ave. There are the girls. To go to the Brighton Theater to see Elvis Presley. The girls really wanted to go and see the movie Love Me Tender. They'd seen it about 14 times apparently, and they were never seen again. So here is the cinema, which was the closest one to their home. They went to the cinema that day and never returned. Their parents waited for them to come home. They were supposed to be home by 11:45. But as you'll see with the astrology, it seems as though by that time, and combined with the autopsy report, that they were deceased within 4 hours of leaving home at 7:30 p.m. A friend of Lorretta, their parents, said that they had a lot of fun that night and saw them at 9:25 standing in the line to get popcorn. The news itself even reached Elvis Presley. He pleaded for them to come home if, in fact, they had run away. On the 22nd of January 1957, everything changed when a man came across the bodies of the two sisters, and this is the gentleman that came across them. They had been beaten really badly. They were nearly beyond recognisable and actually had been torn apart by animals, which is just awful. After the two girls had an autopsy, it was shown that they died within 4 hours of leaving home. So we're going to have a look at the charts. 7:30, 9:25, and when I believe they passed, 11:25. We're also going to have a look at the mapping because it leads directly to the girls. So what we're going to do is have a look at this. I know you're probably going, what? Look at that. It just looks like a pretty picture of circles and crazy nonsense. It does to me too until I start to see it. So what we're going to do is look at this chart first. 7:30 p.m. when the girls left their home. Then 9:25 p.m. when they were last seen by a girlfriend at the theatre after watching Elvis. And then, knowing what we know now, the coroner has said that they would have been deceased within 4 to 5 hours. I've heard 4 hours more than 5 hours. So by 11:25 p.m. both girls were due home, but I believe that's when they were actually killed. That's in my opinion based on these charts. So we're going to look at 7:30, all on the 28th of December 1956. We're going to look at the map from their home and to where they were found. They left from 3634 South Damon Avenue, McKinley Park in Chicago, Illinois, and they left at 7:30, as this chart here says, to get a bus to go and see the movie, as you know. So that's where we have the date and the times. So we're going to look at these three. But predominantly, I'm mostly interested in 9:25 or 9:30, which was the last time the girls were sighted visually by a reputable source at the theatre. So we know between 9:30 and 11:30, basically, it's unfortunately their movements until their death. So the 9:25 chart is going to be the most applicable. So let's have a look firstly at the girls when they left home. I'm going to approach this a little differently as well, and we're going to work with the charts as they move. So we're not going to use the same ruler and descendant. I'll explain as I go. I'm not just going to change the way I work, obviously, but when we're working out timing, it's very interesting to note these things. So you should always stick with the chart that you know is the right one. So the ruler of the AC and the DC here is the victim and the perpetrator, or victims, I should say. But we're going to, for the sake of movement of charts, we're going to have a look at the rulers of the ascendant as they move through from Leo to Virgo to Libra. Okay, so let's have a look at 7:30 when the girls left home. Okay, so this is 7:30. I'm going to zoom in every time I do that. Oops. And move it down a bit. Just can't get it quite big enough. Okay, here we go. So at 7:30 we have Leo rising. So Leo will say at 7:30 Leo is representing the girls. The ruler of Leo is the sun. The sun is over here at 7 degrees of Capricorn in the 5th house of the movies. So that shows that at 7:30 they were happily on their way to the movies. Not going to speculate on a perpetrator right now because we have the two other charts that I want to look at, but I will say that this is Aquarius on the descendant, that's the suspect area, and the ruler of Aquarius in traditional, which is what I like to use, is Saturn. Now Saturn is Saturn's at 8 degrees of Sagittarius, and it is conjunct the moon at 3 degrees of Sagittarius. And the moon is the co-ruler of the two girls. So at 7:30 they are, being the moon and also being the sun, is them leaving home, going to a place of entertainment, which is the 5th house, and going to watch Elvis, who they love, which is a very sun thing as well. So, but we have Saturn here, which is potentially the perpetrator. Saturn represents an older male. We have to keep that in mind. And he's in front of the moon, in front of the girls, but behind them in terms of the rulership here. Now, I like to look at the 8th house. That is ruled by Pisces. So Pisces' traditional rulership is Jupiter, and Jupiter is just on the 3rd house cusp. So think I'm going to start to see a picture forming, only because I've seen so many of these, but we're going to move forward to the next chart and the other, and then we're going to come back and circle through to a full interpretation of all three and see the picture form. So at the present time we have the girls going to the theatre, leaving home, possibly a perpetrator just ahead of them or just behind them, and even to the point of possibly a perpetrator in a vehicle, because it's conjunct the third house cusp, this Jupiter, which is the ruler of the 8th house. The end of the matter here is in Scorpio conjunct Neptune. So we'll have a look at this again on the next chart. 9:25, the time that they were last seen standing in line to get popcorn by a reliable source, which is a friend of the family. This is the chart that I like. I like, well, I don't like it at all because I know that they're deceased, but it's a very workable chart and it makes sense. Now, Leo has moved up here, and Virgo is now the ascendant. Virgo is represented by Virgo is represented by Mercury. Mercury is two people and often siblings. So now it's showing us the siblings at the theatre. Mercury is in the 5th house of the theatre, amazingly. The sun's now moved into the 4th house. Now the moon and Saturn, which we know was applicable from before, has now moved very close to the IC, or the resting place. I am starting to see, first the suspect is now ruled by Pisces, which is Jupiter. So back to Jupiter again. Is in the 2nd house, so out of the vehicle. And how I see it is that he has possibly paid for a ticket for the theatre. That's in the 2nd house of money, and because he was represented by Saturn before, and it's much closer in the 4th house of the resting place, it's almost like he's in front of them in the line of where they stand. I believe the person that hurt them was at the theatre, and I believe that he drove there. I'm not 100% sure yet whether he followed them there, but he was at that theatre, I do believe. This chart shows us a lot, and we're going to go use the angles for the mapping as well. So 3 degrees of Sagittarius, 3 and 4, which is the ruler of the girls. That's very close to the resting place or the end of the matter. So I believe it's not long after this that they have actually been spoken to by an older gentleman that's perhaps coaxed them out of that place. Now, something that I can see now is Aries is now on the 8th house cusp, and the 8th house represents death in this scenario. It is at 0 degrees of Aries. In fact, it's intercepted in the 8th house. So not only that, so we have a violent area in the 8th house, but we also have Mars, which is the ruler of Aries. Mars is anger, and in Aries, it can actually often show a serial killer. And I'm going to go further into that because there are a few suspects in this case, and I'll do this in part 2, where it could show that at least one was possibly a serial killer. I see the serial killer aspect a lot with Mars in fire, and especially with a grand trine here, when we've got Saturn and the malefic planets mixed up with it. So this one shows us they're still at the theatre, but I believe the gentleman that killed them is there as well. Now we're going to have a look at 11:30. I think 11:25 actually I've gone to, because that's the time period where the coroner has said that they would have been deceased within 4 hours of leaving home. 11:25 that evening, and it's actually really interesting as well, and shows me, as I thought when we go back to the beginning, that this person, I think, was actually watching them. I had a feeling that perhaps he was, but this is telling me that more so that he was. So let's zoom in. Now we have 0 degrees of Libra rising, and Jupiter, which is the suspect, is right in front of the girls. Libra is Venus, and Venus is girls. Venus just happens to be right next to Saturn and the Moon. The places we've been talking about the whole time. And now it's back into the 3rd house of travel or local neighbourhood. I know that they were found not too far away, roughly 12 miles away, but the Moon, Saturn, and Saturn also being the physical body, and Venus being very representative of the girls at this point as well, shows me that they were taken away in a vehicle. Now Jupiter is making an aspect to the Moon, so I believe that he was a big, okay, firstly I believe he was a very big person, one strong man, large and tall. This is not a small man, it's not a short man, it's not just a fat man, it's not a skinny man, it's a huge man that can overpower 2 people without a weapon, because there was no gun. Well, we're not 100% sure of that. Looking over here, when we see Mars in the 7th house in Aries, so now we have Aries right on the 7th house cusp at 0 degrees, which is a very critical point. That's an angry point in this chart. So in the 7th house we have an angry suspect. Now Mars can represent all sorts of weapons, blunt force objects, knives, just hitting people with your fists, and guns and so forth. I don't believe there was guns used in this, and the autopsy didn't say anything about guns. I believe this was using hands. This was a strong person, and here he is right in the face of the girls at this point in time, and I wouldn't be surprised if at 11:30 they were in the trunk of the vehicle, or in the vehicle to be taken to their dump spot. So it's quite clear here. Mercury, which was representing the girls prior to this, is now moved into the 4th house, which is the resting place, the end of the matter. The end of the matter is in Capricorn. Capricorn's just on top of the earth. They were found just off the side of the road, and that's representative of that. Although I'm using the other chart, which has a Sagittarian IC, and Sagittarius shows us it's a little bit hilly, and that is also applicable to what the case was. It was slightly hilly where they were found. So with this Mars here in Aries, on that 0 degrees Aries point in the 7th house of the suspect, he's doing, or has done, the damage and has put them in the vehicle, and he's right there with them still at 11:30. So just circling back around to the very first chart when they left at 7:30, we have Jupiter here, as I said, just going into the 3rd house. So to me that is like he's just about to get into his vehicle to follow the girls. So this actually gives me some more information to say that I believe that he followed them purposely and possibly waited for them to finish their movie to take advantage of them. Okay, now we're going to use the 9:30 chart, which is this one, to do the mapping. So remembering that the girls are co-ruled by the moon at 4 degrees of Sagittarius, and the IC, or the resting place, is 3 degrees of Sagittarius. And remembering that they were represented ultimately by Venus being nearly 12 degrees. Just remember these numbers: 3 Sagittarius and 12 and 4 for the moon. And then a little bit later on we're going to utilize this as well further to see whether this in fact was a serial killer that did this, and whether we can trace his movements from this set of charts to the next murder that I'm going to cover. Okay, let's have a look at this map. Actually a lot to go through with this chart. It's a simple one. They're not always simple like this, and they're not always so precise, but one line led to the girls. So I've gone out 12.77 miles, so 12 to 13 miles out. This line here is 243 degrees, and that represents 3 degrees of Sagittarius. Here we go. 3 degrees of Sagittarius conjunct the moon, exactly where the IC, the resting place, is, right next to the co-ruler of the girls themselves, is exactly the position that the map led to. Now we'll change the view. So their house here is around here, McKinley Park. One line, 243 degrees. And I will just remove this. The girls were found, don't need that extra little line there. The girls were found about 200 feet or so off of the County Line Road and on German Church Road into this little bit of bushland here. So more Sagittarian like. We've got some fields around, and it's a little bit hilly and road, than Capricorn, as I said, but Capricorn in terms of just on the earth, not buried deep beneath the earth, not in water. If it was a water sign on the IC, we would expect to have found them in water, but no, it appears as though he's just come down. Well, let's see the way that it goes. So this way, from an initial look, down German Church Road and then just dropped them off there, because I do know that the theatre that they went to was in Brighton up here. So I believe he was near them, watching them, and then took them there. The next girl that we're going to look at, who I think belongs to the same case, or the next case, and personally I think it's a serial killer, was found just down here and disappeared, and was found under very similar circumstances. Now both of these girls were found undressed and raped and bludgeoned so badly, and so was the other girl that was found later on. Now again, as I said before, this is showing us with Aries at 0 degrees on the 8th house cusp of death, with angry Mars in Aries in there. And if you watch my previous videos on serial killers, they very often have Mars in Aries or Mars in Leo. So here we have a big fire trine between the Moon, Saturn, Uranus and Mars. There's actually a lot of grand aspects in here that we could talk about, but in the next part of the video, when we move on to the next person, who is Bonnie Lee Scott, she was killed 1 year later, we will discuss these charts and hers, and then figure out who killed Barbara, Patricia and Bonnie Lee Scott. As I said, this chart and the others shows me we are looking for one man who is older, who has... It's possible that this man has some learning disabilities or is a little bit slow. I don't feel he's extremely intelligent. Very large, tall. He would stand out in a crowd. Obviously, it's many years later. It's highly likely this person isn't even alive anymore. But out of the suspects that came from the investigation, we can have a look through and see who fits. We're looking for a Jupiterian type person. Okay, until the next part, thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and if you enjoy what I do, I've popped a little donation thing down there, because unfortunately we lost our jobs and everything with this COVID, as so many people did. So any pennies help, and if you really enjoy what I do and you can afford it, then great. If not, that's fine too. I hope you enjoy these videos. I hope it helps in some way. Until next time, take care everyone. Bye.